Um, Hello, good evening from Australia. Can you see my screen?
We can see it and we hear you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm honored to be able to talk to you this evening from Australia. And I'd like to thank UNWTO very much for the kind invitation. Dirk asked me to present briefly some insights from a recent study we did, which looked at how the region can encourage domestic tourists to come back and to reflect also on what this research meant for the governance structure and how this work is embedded into the governance of the observatory. I'm lucky enough, and I should say this at the outset, to talk to you from a region that is essentially COVID-free and has been since April. So this is a very particular situation we are in, and please, the findings that I will present you are shaped, I guess, by this particular situation as well. So in discussing with our working group, with our local partners in around March and April, we together decided that it is not the time for doing business as usual, but rather to do some targeted work in order to maintain relevance for the observatory and to support our partners in their specific decision making that became very pressing around this time. So we shifted our focus somewhat, and we are not a large observatory, so we had to concentrate energies in any case. The two areas we decided to focus on together with the local stakeholders were destination recovery, so which recovery efforts should be implemented and supporting them in understanding and testing the effectiveness of such measures. And secondly, and this has been mentioned quite a few times today, also monitoring residents' attitudes towards tourism, as generally movement of people has been associated with an increased risk of spreading the pandemic. I'd like to share some context about the region we are in, which I think is really crucial to understand what I'm going to show you. It is a region which is highly dominated by domestic travel. About 86% of the 3.3 million visitors that come to the Australia Southwest region are intrastate visitors. So they come actually from one Western Australian state. And an additional 8% come from other Australian states, and relatively few, so 6%, are international visitors. So you can see this huge importance of domestic travel, and these are numbers from 2019, so pre-COVID. It is also important to consider, and I said this at the beginning, that Western Australia, so the region we are based in, hasn't seen any community transmission in COVID since April. All the cases that happened since then were in a controlled and mandatory hotel quarantine. While Australia has probably comparatively low COVID incidence, it still has seen two quite pronounced waves, with the second one having been mostly focused around the city of Melbourne and surroundings. So we are based in a place which is kind of surrounded by much more difficult situations, and rather than talking about travel bubbles, the talk here has been to create an island, a travel island, which is almost separated from the rest of the world, if not even the country. Looking at the occupancy in the accommodation providers of the region, it is also quite a strong message to see that after a regional lockdown has been implemented, which resulted in plummeting occupancy figures, and occupancy went down to about 5% in March and April. the demand came strongly back, stronger than ever. As I said, it's based on domestic demand, and we saw as stronger demand during the Southern Hemisphere winter months than ever before. So in that situation, and when also Australian national borders have been closed or were closed since March and continue to be closed, we conducted some experimental research in order to understand which factors and which measures can encourage domestic tourists to travel to the region. So essentially what we asked them is, if your personal circumstances permitted, how likely would you book a visit to the Australia Southwest region, which is the region where the observatory is based in the near future in a hypothetical situation? And we provided our respondents with different situations and tested their willingness to book under these scenarios. We had, together with our partners, we could get access to their databases, and so we interviewed or surveyed 666 previous visitors to the region. So actually these were, in many cases, these were regular visitors to the region. Just a brief look at the scenarios we provided our respondents with. I won't go into detail, but some saw the situation that higher incidence of the pandemic was occurring, a second wave. Some saw information about whether international visitors would be allowed, which they aren't at the time being, or whether they wouldn't be allowed, whether and which type of social distancing measures would be implemented. Some respondents were nudged with a message around the fact that tourism is still very relevant for mental and physical well-being. Some saw information about discounts, others saw flexible cancellation policies, others saw information about hygiene measures, including mandatory masks for employees, temperature checks for employees. In some scenarios, there was information about a compulsory COVID tracing app. And then we also included advertising messages. One message encouraging people to support the local tourism operators, so invoking solidarity with them. Another message more targeting the dreaming stage of the customer journey, trying to connect and with visitors and remind them of the beauty of the region. And finally, one message that emphasized, and we thought it could be interesting, that space might be the new luxury in a pandemic situation. So we conducted a regression analysis, and I'm briefly showing some results. Based on this analysis, we could develop some approximation in terms of what these measures, which impact they have on the probability of booking. This approximation is, in most cases, this comes close to the actual numbers. So you can see having a higher incidence, such as a second wave, has a huge impact on probability of booking, minus 40% of all domestic tourists here. Allowing international visitors also impacts on the risk perception of these domestic tourists, and that's not surprising given the media coverage they had in Australia. There are a number of positive measures that can help to encourage people to visit, such as in social distancing measures, nudging them with well-being messages, although the effect is small. A quite consistent effect of discounts and, in particular, lenient, so flexible cancellation policies. Hygiene measures didn't show apparently an effect on the willingness to book, but I will come back to that. The mandatory app resulted in backlash, so visitors were not interested in having that mandatory, whereas the advertising messages seem to work quite well, except the space is the new luxury message. So what I want to emphasize is that social distancing did not appear to have negative effects, which was interesting to us. because we had specifically emphasized that not all attractions would be accessible. So we emphasized the negative side of that as well. The recommendation to be careful with making such COVID tracing apps mandatory, at least in the Australian context, as there might be privacy concerns. And interestingly, hygiene measures did not show a clear effect in terms of impact. We saw this very strong impact of having a second wave, for example, but even some anxiety around allowing international visitors in. But at the same time, other measures can be combined in order to almost counter some of these effects, which is also a positive news, I guess, for the tourism industry. We looked at the demographics as well, and we saw that early adopters are those people who go camping compared to those people staying in hotels. Early adopters are men compared to women. Women show a much more risk averse in this situation, and younger people are also early adopters according to the data we collected. And I come back to the hygiene thing. Although overall we couldn't see a strong effect, if we look just at women, implementing hygiene measures increased their willingness to book by 25%, which we found quite interesting. So what did these findings mean for our local stakeholders? It essentially supported their status quo approach. So they've most of the things that that came up as being helpful, they had been implementing already at the regional basis and at the national basis. So it provided further evidence to that. We have been requested to extend the work now with interstate and international tourists to see what can work in bringing them back once borders would open. We are currently carrying out some work on monitoring local reactions regarding their willingness to accept international tourists, as this has become a particularly pressing topic, and also considering different scenarios, such as whether once a vaccine has been developed, whether there's quick testing developed, and so on. And I've seen first results which appear quite interesting. We also had to maneuver a difficult political situation, or a heated political arena, I would say, as the border topic has been the hottest topic in Australian politics over the last couple of months. So what we decided in terms of observatory governance is to perform our role as being a data provider, and shifting from perhaps one big report to timely short reports, but staying away from any sort of decision making, just giving the evidence, but staying away in order to avoid the political turmoil. So in more theoretical terms, what we focused on is knowledge, providing knowledge, really focusing on maintaining the trust in the network that we had, in not pushing our agenda or perhaps our media presence ourselves too heavily, but working in the background, having a subtle approach in providing and showing that evidence can help in decision making. So I guess in that manner, by providing information that no other organization provided, by navigating carefully in this dynamic environment, I think the acceptance and the relevance of the observatory, although it is a small one, has thrived. Yeah, that's all from my side. I thank you very much for the attention, and back to you, Dirk.